I don't know when I started noticing the small things about her. The way her hand lingered a moment too long on the doorframe when she welcomed me in. The way her perfume didn't just smell, it stayed, like a quiet claim on the air. Or maybe it was the way she looked at me sometimes, steady, as if she was daring me to look away first. She was older than me, sure. Mid-40s. The kind of woman who carried her years like jewelry, earned, gleaming, deliberate. And me? I was 20-something, all raw edges and restlessness. I told myself I admired her, that was all. Admiration was safe. But when I found myself at her house that night, standing in her kitchen with the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence, admiration felt like the weakest excuse I'd ever used. "Sit," she said, her voice even, though something in it brushed against me like static. I obeyed, sinking into the chair at her small wooden table. She set a glass of water down in front of me. My hand touched it, and in the process, hers brushed mine. Just a flicker, the back of her fingers against my knuckles. Nothing more. But it was enough to shift the air. I couldn't look up right away. My throat tightened with words I didn't have the right to say. Instead, I stared at the water, the surface trembling slightly from the way my fingers gripped the glass. When I did glance up, she was watching me. Not with a smile. Not with disapproval. Just watching, like she wanted to see if I'd flinch, if I'd run. "I shouldn't have asked you to come here," she said finally, her voice softer this time. "Why not?" I asked. The words came out quicker than I meant them to. She leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other. It was casual, the kind of move anyone could make. But the shift of her skirt, the quiet authority in her posture, it pulled my attention in ways I couldn't disguise. "You're too young," she said, shaking her head lightly, almost like she was reminding herself. "And me. I've already lived this part of life. You haven't." I should have laughed, or disagreed, or said something clever. Instead, silence stretched between us. My hand tightened around the glass. And she noticed, of course she noticed. Her eyes softened then, a flicker of something almost vulnerable. She reached across the table, fingertips grazing the edge near mine. "You should leave before this turns into something it shouldn't." But I didn't move. The kitchen light above us was too bright, so much so that every second felt exposed, dangerous. But in that brightness, I couldn't stop tracing the curve of her wrist, the faint line at the corner of her mouth when she bit back whatever words she didn't want to say. Finally, she stood. I followed her without knowing why, my body moving before my mind could catch up. She walked toward the hallway, the sound of her heels soft against the floor. I trailed behind, close enough to feel the warmth that her presence left in the air. At her bedroom door, she paused. Her hand rested on the knob, knuckles pale for a moment before she pushed it open. Then she stepped inside, and when I crossed the threshold after her, I heard it. The click of the lock sliding into place. She turned, her back against the door now, her hand still on the lock. Her eyes met mine, steady, almost defiant. And then she whispered, low and certain, every syllable pulling me closer. "No one can ever know about this." And before I could answer, the sound of a phone buzzing broke the silence. The phone buzzed again, but neither of us moved toward it. I could feel the weight of her gaze on me, steady and unreadable, and it made my own attention hyper-focused, every tiny movement magnified. She exhaled slowly, a quiet, almost imperceptible shiver passing through her shoulders. "It's complicated," she said, voice low. I didn't ask what she meant, I didn't need to. Her glance held a whole history, long afternoons alone in an apartment too quiet, decisions she'd made that she couldn't undo, moments of loneliness she'd tucked behind a careful smile. I shifted, trying to keep my hands from betraying the way they ached to reach for her. The room smelled faintly of her perfume, warm and intimate. My pulse thudded a little too loudly, or maybe I just noticed it more because she was so close. She moved slightly, brushing against my arm as she leaned over a stack of papers on the dresser. I told myself it was accidental, that I imagined the electricity in the touch. Her eyes caught mine again, and for a second I saw hesitation, a kind of vulnerability she almost never allowed herself to show. I imagined the conversations she had with herself late at night, the whispered regrets about past relationships, and suddenly my own fears seemed insignificant. She wasn't just older, she carried a life inside her that I could barely glimpse. And yet, standing there, she was reaching toward me in ways that didn't need words. I wanted to ask her if she'd been lonely too, if this, whatever this was, had been waiting in the silence for someone to notice. But I didn't. Instead, I felt my fingers brush the edge of her desk as if grounding myself. She noticed anyway. "You shouldn't get too close," she said softly, almost a warning. Her hand lingered near mine on the dresser, a breath away. I could feel the heat of her proximity, the way her hair fell forward, brushing her cheek against the side of her neck. She pulled back, just slightly, as if to remind both of us that there were rules we couldn't ignore. And yet, she didn't move away entirely. I realized then how much danger there was in this attraction, the whispers of age gap, improper, risky, floating in the corners of my mind. But standing here, feeling her near me, the world outside faded. The only thing that mattered was the pull between us, quiet and magnetic. She turned, finally, and our hands met, not fully, but fingertips grazing, enough to send a jolt through me. A pause hung in the air, heavy with everything left unsaid. I wanted to lean in, to feel the warmth of her shoulder against me, but I stopped, holding the moment instead, letting the tension thrum between us like a secret melody. And she smiled, small, knowing, almost shy in a way I hadn't seen before, and in that glance, I felt something shift. Not a promise, not yet. Just recognition. That we were both dangerously close to crossing the line. And neither of us wanted to step back. The knock came before either of us could speak. Hard, insistent, almost shattering the quiet that had settled between us. My chest jumped, and she startled slightly, stepping back just enough to break the invisible line we'd been holding. "Who is it?" she called softly, her voice steady but not quite hiding the tension. I think it's just my neighbor," I said, but neither of us moved toward the door. Our proximity made the air between us unbearable, every heartbeat loud, every breath drawn with effort. She tilted her head, letting her hair fall just so, brushing against my shoulder. My hand twitched, wanting to brush it away, or to keep it there. I wasn't sure which. A message buzzed on my phone. I ignored it. The screen lit up with a name I didn't recognize, but I could feel the weight of its interruption as sharply as the knock. She watched me, and for a moment I caught her hesitation, the way her lips pressed together, the slight tremor in her hands. Maybe you should check," she whispered, eyes dark and unreadable. But she didn't move me toward the door. Her hand lingered near mine on the counter. Closer. So close it was almost dangerous. I swallowed. She smelled like the faint trace of something floral, something warm, something that made my head spin without a word. The gap between us was unbearable, as if the room itself had shrunk, the walls leaning in. Her gaze dipped briefly to my lips. I caught it. My throat went dry. I wanted to lean in, to close the distance, to feel the press of her mouth against mine just once, just to know it. But I didn't. She didn't. The knock came again, softer this time, almost patient. And that almost kiss, the brush of near contact, lingered in the air like smoke. We both stepped back, pretending to straighten, pretending to check our composure. But the tension didn't fade. My fingers itched, wanting her to reach out, to pull me closer, but I didn't move. She didn't move. And yet, when our eyes met again, the world outside that tiny room ceased to exist. We can't," she murmured. The words were gentle, meant as a shield, but they had the opposite effect. My heart slammed against my ribs. She shifted slightly, closer than before, brushing against me with a casualness that was anything but casual. My hand brushed hers, light, tentative, yet charged with every unspoken confession between us. We froze, suspended in a moment that teetered on the edge of everything we wanted and everything we feared. Then she sighed, just a whisper, almost inaudible, and in that breath, I felt her leaning closer, closer than ever, even as she tried to resist, even as I tried to stop myself. The pull was undeniable, magnetic, impossible to ignore. The door remained closed, the knock faded, the world outside receding. And still, we stood there, closer than we'd ever allowed ourselves, held in a silence heavier than words. Closer. And neither of us could move away. The quiet between us had grown heavy, almost unbearable. Every movement, every breath felt magnified. I could feel her warmth before I even saw her, the soft rhythm of her pulse through the slight brush of her arm against mine. My hands itched to reach for her, to steady the tremor I felt in my own chest. I can't stop thinking about you, I said low, almost a whisper, though the words burned their way out of me. The confession tasted strange, urgent, and dangerously honest. Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't step back. She never did. Her hand hovered near mine, fingers brushing my wrist in a fleeting, impossible touch. The motion sent a shiver through me that had nothing to do with cold air. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice, my heart, my thoughts. You shouldn't what? She interrupted softly, tilting her head as if to invite the truth from me. She leaned a fraction closer, and the scent of her, warm, faintly floral, intoxicating, filled the space between us. My mind faltered. You know I can't, I said, words tangled with hesitation. But I do. I can't stop. She leaned in too, just enough for our shoulders to touch. The brush of her hair against my cheek made me dizzy. I could feel her breath near my ear, soft, slow, almost daring me to respond. You're dangerous, she said quietly, her hand finally resting against my chest, fingers splaying slightly, hesitant but deliberate. And I shouldn't want this. But I do. Her confession was like a spark in dry tinder. I wanted to tell her the same, wanted to tell her that every glance, every brush of our hands, had left me restless, awake at night replaying moments like this. But my words caught in my throat. Instead, I let my hand rise, trembling slightly, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her eyes closed for a fraction of a second at the touch, and my chest tightened. The air around us seemed to thrum, each second stretching longer than the last. My lips hovered near hers, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath, the faint shiver of anticipation in her body. She tilted her head slightly, just enough for our foreheads to nearly touch, and I thought, maybe this time, maybe now, everything could change. She began, voice low, almost breaking. Her hand moved to rest against my neck, thumb brushing the side of my jaw. My pulse raced. I could hear it. I could feel it. The moment stretched, suspended in a delicate tension. And then she whispered, so softly I barely caught it, words that made the world shrink around us. If anyone ever knew, we'd be ruined. I wanted to laugh, to kiss her, to hold her until the world ceased to exist. But the words hung there, heavy, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. And then, just as my lips inched closer, she froze. I felt it, her hesitation, her breath catching. The space between us closed, pulsing with everything we hadn't said. And then, the door creaked again, but this time, it wasn't just a sound. It was a presence. A shadow fell across the threshold, my neighbor, or maybe someone from upstairs, someone whose timing had always been impeccable in the worst way. I froze. She froze. The air between us condensed, each heartbeat echoing like a drum in the silence. They saw me, I whispered, voice low. My words barely carried, but they landed heavy between us. Her eyes widened. She stepped back, then forward almost instinctively, brushing against me. The contact was accidental, or maybe it wasn't, and it sent heat spiraling through me. She pressed a hand to the edge of the counter, gripping it lightly as if to anchor herself, her fingers trembling ever so slightly. What do you mean? She asked, voice tight, almost fragile. Her gaze flicked toward the door, and I could feel the tension coiling in her shoulders, the almost imperceptible bite of her lip betraying the calm she tried to wear. I started, then stopped. My mind scrambled, searching for something to say, some excuse, some truth I could spin to cover this. But the truth wasn't mine to cover. They saw us. Or maybe heard. I don't know exactly, but it changes everything. Her breath caught, and I watched her chest rise and fall rapidly. She turned her head, brushing a hand over her face, fingers grazing the curve of her jaw. I wanted to reach for her, to pull her close, but she stiffened, just enough to make the distance between us both unbearable and impossible to ignore. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. I noticed how her blouse clung subtly to the curve of her shoulder, how her hair fell across her collarbone, how even in fear, in hesitation, she radiated a warmth that pulled at me. I didn't think, she whispered finally, voice low, breaking in a way that made me ache. I didn't think anyone would ever see this. I thought it was ours. Her words, barely audible, struck me like lightning. The sense of safety, of secret intimacy we built, collapsed. And yet, every brush of her hand against mine, every near touch as she leaned past me to adjust something on the counter, pulled me closer, made it impossible to step back entirely. My own body betrayed me. My fingers brushed hers again, light, tentative, lingering longer than necessary. She didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head, eyes dark, searching mine for permission, understanding, some unspoken consent. I can't, not anymore, I said, voice tight. Everything's changing. And I still want you. Her lips parted slightly, a breath caught between fear and desire. Her hand slid up to the side of my neck, brushing against my ear, tracing the line of my jaw. She was closer than ever, and I could feel her warmth, her scent, the tremor in her body matching my own. And then she exhaled sharply, decision and surrender mingling in one movement. She stepped forward, closing the remaining distance between us, just enough to make the world outside irrelevant. But before anything could happen, her phone lit up on the dresser. The screen flashed a name we both recognized, and suddenly the fragile, dangerous intimacy hung by a thread. She glanced at it, then back at me, eyes dark and resolute. We can't, not yet. But soon, she whispered. And in that whisper, the inevitability of what was coming pressed down on us both. The room seemed smaller now, walls leaning in as if the world itself wanted us to stop pretending. We were inches apart, just the faintest gap between our bodies, and I could feel the heat radiating from her, the subtle rhythm of her breath brushing against my cheek. Every nerve in me was alert, every heartbeat echoing in my chest. I can't. I shouldn't, she whispered, voice tight but trembling, the words barely audible. Her hand hovered near mine, uncertain, yet unwilling to leave entirely. You don't have to, I said, keeping my voice low, steady, though my pulse was hammering. Not if you don't want to. But I need you to know. I swallowed. I don't want to step back anymore. Her gaze met mine, and in it, I saw 1,000 things, fear, desire, guilt, and longing all tangled together. She was trying to measure the risk, to weigh what was right against what her heart demanded. But her body betrayed her, leaning slightly toward me despite every protest, fingers brushing my arm in a silent confession. The tension was unbearable. I wanted to close the distance, to feel the warmth of her lips against mine, but I hesitated, giving her the choice even as my own desire screamed for her to move closer. Her eyes searched mine, questioning, pleading, daring me to act. I'm scared, she admitted finally, voice breaking just enough to shatter every defense I had left. I am too, I whispered, letting my hand lift slowly to rest near hers, fingertips just grazing, and the spark that shot through me made my chest ache. But I can't ignore this. I can't pretend I'm not drawn to you. She shivered, brushing a hand along the side of my neck, thumb tracing the line of my jaw. I leaned closer, careful, tentative, letting my forehead rest near hers. The heat of her breath mingled with mine. Every sound, the faint creak of the floor, the distant hum of the refrigerator, became amplified in the quiet of the room. We lingered there, suspended between choice and surrender, each second stretching impossibly long. Then, slowly, deliberately, she closed the remaining distance. Not all at once, but with purpose, leaning in until her lips were nearly against mine. Our foreheads touched, our breaths mingled. Every hesitation, every doubt melted away in that moment of raw, human closeness. I could feel the warmth of her body, the slight tremor in her hands, the quiet surrender in her eyes. "We can't stop ourselves," I murmured, voice low, reverent. "No," she whispered back, and in that single word, everything unspoken, everything feared, everything desired was laid bare. We didn't rush. There was no grand flourish, no sudden leap, just the slow, inevitable acknowledgement that this, us, was real, messy, human. Every inch of the space between us disappeared, not with perfection, but with honesty. For the first time, we understood each other completely. And in that understanding, there was clarity. The quiet that followed our surrender was unlike any silence I'd ever known. Not empty. Not tense. But full of warmth, understanding, and the weight of everything we'd both been holding back. She leaned against me, soft and tentative at first, as if testing the reality of it. My arm wrapped around her, drawing her close, and she melted against me like she'd been waiting for this for years. I could feel the steady rise and fall of her chest, the faint shiver in her shoulders, the warmth of her hand finding mine and lacing our fingers together without a word. "Do you really mean it?" she whispered, voice low, intimate. "I do," I said simply, letting my forehead rest against hers. "Every word. Every moment." She closed her eyes, letting out a long, shaky breath. "I've been scared of what people might think, of what I allowed myself to feel. But with you, it feels right." Her hand tightened in mine, grounding me even as my pulse raced. We stayed like that, bodies pressed together, hearts beating almost in sync. Every brush of her fingers against mine, every shift of her weight against me, felt electric and grounding all at once. The age gap, the hesitation, the social whispers, all of it melted away in the simplicity of being together. "You're reckless," she murmured with a half-smile, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. "And yet, somehow, perfect." "Perfectly reckless?" I teased softly, and she laughed, a sound that made something inside me unclench. A little of the tension from months of longing, fear, and restraint began to dissolve. We sank into the couch together, limbs tangled, shoulders touching, hands still entwined. I rested my head on hers, feeling the warmth of her hair against my cheek, the soft, steady beat of her heart beneath my hand. She tilted her head slightly, brushing her lips to my temple in a gesture that said everything words never could. This feels like home," she whispered. "Then stay," I said, voice low, intimate. "Right here. Right now. We don't have to think about anything else." She pressed closer, letting the moment stretch, letting the world outside exist without us. The weight of our fears was gone, replaced by something far more fragile and precious: trust, desire, and acceptance. Time became irrelevant. We didn't need words. Each look, each touch, each soft breath carried everything we'd been holding back. Finally, she rested her head against my shoulder, and I held her, long and tight, as if memorizing the feel of her, knowing that nothing could undo this connection. We were together. Fully. Messy, human, real, and it was more than either of us had dared hope. And in that quiet, intimate embrace, I knew we had crossed the line from longing to belonging, from hesitation to surrender. I looked at her, smiled softly, and whispered, "We're here. Together." She smiled back, warmth and relief shining in her eyes. "Yes. Together." Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?